Welcome to the Unlocked Podcast. We are three business owners from North Carolina, Minnesota, and Canada. Just the broad Canada. Is that okay
Oh
to say?
man.
We're
No one
we're
knows where it
we're
is anyway, so
Well,
it's up there.
it'll confuse you guys less. So just
Hey
keep it
Lars,
at
did
that.
you hear that we voted in a new president?
I heard you guys are soon going to be great again.
we're still all right, not to get into politics. Welcome to this episode where we are sharing our insights from running locksmith businesses and hopefully impacting our industry by sharing our experiences. We started part one of this conversation last episode on organizational growth, really diving into the difference between organic versus acquisition. And if you missed part one, you probably want to go check that out. But there are some really good takeaways in part two. Mainly, Lars figured out how to get his in ears plugged in correctly, and so he's
You
he's
know,
feeling.
it's remarkable when you don't have them in the wrong ear. It feels better.
Yeah.
It you can hear better,
Yeah.
and you don't have to constantly fidget with them because they
Yeah.
just don't hurt your ears. Yeah, it's highly
So
recommended.
our audience, especially on the video side, is going to appreciate the fact that your
My ears aren't sitting
things.
like this anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad we sat here for literally been doing this for 5 weeks, and
this
no
would
one's
assume
mentioned
they
this
pay
to me.
attention to him, though.
This is
you know,
5 weeks I've been sitting here. You're staring at me. And
So we're excited for you.
God.
So major advancements. We have a blast running a business, putting audio equipment together and sticking headphones in our ears. Maybe not the best at, but
More of a doorknob salesman than a ear putter inner guy.
so we're excited. Let's jump back into this conversation. Part two starts right now. So that moves us from one or two man van to a business that is fully operational.
Yeah, I think, well, when we were originally talking about this topic, we've had, we go back. I'm already laughing thinking about it. I know Jennifer would be sitting there smiling at me right now because I famously had an acquisition that was just awful. it, it was bad right from the beginning, and it just got worse all the way through. And it was to the point like, what are we even doing here? But being a bit dumber, certainly younger, it just ego got in the way a little bit there, and we wanted to make this happen. And
wasn't
so
this like 6 months
we-
ago?
I did say younger. Now, this was a few years ago, but that was
That
another
ego's
one.
really shrunk since then.
Yeah, that was a one-man shop, so I'm going to ignore that one. We have what I'd say of our acquisitions. Our best acquisition was the most recent one. It was established. They were doing about 2 million revenue, I think, 1.8 in that range.
Hmm.
They had an established team, so they had 5 or 6 locksmiths. They had administrators. They had, it wasn't a small business. It was a true operating company, I would call it. We retained most of the staff when they came on.
And this was
The
a different geography, right?
Yeah, this was in Edmonton, so that's north. Believe it or not, there's even farther north than
How
where I
far
am.
away for people that don't know Canada? So most of our audience.
200 kilometers. So I'll let you Google what that is in miles, but um, it's about 6,800 yards, I think.
Okay. How many hours?
About 2 hours north.
Okay, perfect.
But the big difference here was if you are geographically expanding is one, but if you are looking to take on an operating business, you need to have a person dedicated to that acquisition. I think the one that has worked the best in Edmonton, one of our guys who will be a partner here very shortly, was interested. I approached him and said, "This is what we're thinking of doing. If you're interested in moving up there, this is the path that'll go forward." Make him an equity partner in that branch, and he would run it. Give him full operating control. He basically, we meet a couple times a week. We discuss things, but he's got the power to do whatever he needs to do. And because of that alignment, I know it's in the best interest for himself and the company. and it's just gone very well. So originally, like I said, I think it was about 1.8 to 2 million in range in revenue. Our first year of acquisition, we did see a reduction in revenue, and I think that's largely due to some price changes. We did increase some price, probably lost some business that I didn't value as much. Just the residential side of business, I think, is where we would have reduced. But now this year we're on pace for our largest revenue in the history of that company. And I think that is directly related to, Chad, what you're talking about as far as same customer, just additional services. Whereas, I think that company focused on a lot of just traditional locks and keys. And now we're taking more of a door hardware approach, a larger spectrum. We do some access. I don't think we've gotten to cameras up there yet, but just adding those services has increased the ticket price because there's more value there.
Mm-hmm.
How did you go about identifying that person?
Well, this was a guy I knew personally.
Are you talking about identifying the person to run it, or identifying the person to acquire?
To run it? This was Mason, right?
Yeah, it's Mason.
Yeah. What did you do to identify him? What stuck out about him? How did that come about?
Well, I knew him personally. I knew his family. I knew, I've known him since he was a punk. And I know his values and his family values and how he was raised align very well with myself and our company. And I knew he's bright. He works hard. He doesn't get distracted by, tinfoil on the ground tone. But it was more a cultural fit. He's definitely not like me. Take your jokes there.
Where he somehow can tolerate you.
Yeah, well, he's not the guy that's going to want to, stand on stage and flap his arms around a lot. But he was more focused on getting work done, and that technical mindset. He is a very gifted and technical locksmith and person, and just like the acquisitions I was saying with the 1 and 2 man shops, I basically said, like, hey, all the crap that you don't like doing, we'll continue to do this. I need somebody to take on what I can't do, which is to teach the technical guys and be that mentor and leader. So, that's a long-winded version of saying it was a personal cultural fit that I knew his mentality in life is going to be similar to mine. And that just makes it a lot easier because you don't have to question what our priorities are.
How did the staff respond to some new guy coming in? They don't know. I mean, you said how many staff was up there?
On acquisition, I think there's probably 8.
So 8 people,
maybe
brand
10.
New manager that's never managed before. How did that go?
Well, we had moments that went about as well as you'd expect. And I think with every acquisition, it's important to not go pedal to the metal. So we go in there and I think try and get an understanding of how everything runs. This will shock you, but I'm not overly lenient on moving away from my beliefs, core values, and culture of our company. So, if you're acquiring in a company, there's a reason for that. If you're acquiring a bad company, I would question why you're doing that. I've done it. Doesn't work very well. But, so I didn't want to just run right in there and say, okay, Mason's the new boss, Mason, change everything, make them exactly like us and run with it. Learn how they do things. Learn if what they're doing is better, because if it is, bring it back to us and let's change how we do it. But slowly over time, let's mesh these two cultures. I've never done an acquisition where there wasn't some termination, layoff, people quitting immediately, just because our culture is not going to be for everyone, and that should be expected. So we've effectively, over the last 2 years, there's a handful of people that are still around, but we've probably turned over 70% over the last few years. And that's, I think part of that is intentional, part of it is not. But my belief there is that, putting Mason in place there, this is Mason's team, this is Mason's company. So Mason has to be responsible for bringing in his type of people. When I talked to him about it, I said, you got to build a Mason team. Okay. People that are going to be your people. And not too much too soon, but that's been the strategy. And it's worked very, very well.
Yeah, I think that's a good takeaway to when you're acquiring a business, expect some turnover. The first business we acquired, they had 6 staff members. I think for 3 or 4 years we kept all 6, but 3 of the 6 have turned over. This third business we acquired, 4 of the 6 had turned over within a year and a half. But we identified the key team members from each acquisition that we wanted to retain and that we were acquiring. So that's something that going forward, when we look at acquisitions, we look for what do we actually want to buy? Do we want the people? Do we want the customers? Do we want the intellectual property? What are the things we want to buy? And plan for some of that turnover and understand that, yes, you might be getting some good individuals out of the acquisition, but you're going to lose some of them. And that's the thing that we looked at with acquisitions going forward, is making sure we're very strategic about this. I think I said that earlier, but have a plan for why we want to acquire them, how we're going to integrate them. The first 2 that had actually staff on them, we didn't really plan for how to integrate them. We had some ideas, but we also had never done it before, so we didn't know how that works. I think going forward now, whenever we do another acquisition, we will plan far in advance. This is how this is going to work, and be transparent with the owner and the staff. This is what the integration is going to look like. What do you guys think of this? And be open and transparent about that, so we know that, hey, we're going to end up with 50% turnover here, or we're going to end up with the whole thing being turned over, but we want the customer base or whatever it may be. So make sure that when you are acquiring a business, you're proactive about it, you have a plan, and you lay out that roadmap. We didn't do that, and we suffered because of it. Go figure.
Yeah. And Chad, I know you guys are all beards and coffee down there, but when you do acquisitions, is it mandatory everyone goes beard and coffee, or how do you handle the cultural differences?
So I'd spoken with an individual who had done a lot of acquisitions, and a lot of larger acquisitions than I've ever been involved with. And he said, I was asking, like, how does he integrate people into their organization, to their culture, whatever. And he said, basically, when they do an acquisition, they change nothing for a period of time. And when they roll into it, they establish that with the company and the employees. Nothing's changing. Everything should be exactly the same as it is right now, but change will happen. So we will come in and assess, review, whatever, and then implement some change. And I thought that was interesting, because I guess my original perspective was go in there and change everything day one and get that aligned with the operations of the organization. So that was one piece of advice that I applied to the acquisition that we did in Anderson. When I walked in, I said, look.
Did he say why? Sorry.
Well, he said it basically, one, they may be doing some things good already, and they may want to keep them. They may want to integrate them into their own organization operation. But 2, there's no benefit in doing an organizational shakeup as soon as you walk in, because everybody's going to be. He said people are humans are already going to be a bit on edge.
Yep.
Am I getting ready to lose my job? What's my future look like? So make sure that you can identify that and talk to it out of the gate. We're just coming in here because this company is, this owner is leaving. This owner is going to stay here, whatever the situation is. And this is why we're here. And this is what we're going to try to accomplish. But just laying it all out and being transparent at the beginning. So that was a good piece of advice. I had that before the acquisition. The one piece that he didn't give me that I learned the hard way was not identifying who was going to come in and lead that branch. Exactly what Lars was talking about with your individual. And so we were going to try to, with the one in Anderson, we tried to manage it from Charlotte. And it
from the community. We'll all just manage it.
Correct.
Yeah. And how will that go?
It was not effective, right? It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't effective. We got through it. And so that was one thing that I made note of before we did any other acquisitions, was we got to identify who's going to be there and in charge before we started. And we've been fortunate enough where we have a lot of people inside of our team that are very open to growing with the company and relocating and all that. So that's been a benefit. But the other component of that I wanted to add in is around the focus on. I just lost my train of thought. So somebody talk while
You
I'm trying to
mentioned something
remember.
about geographic expansion. That's something we've never
Oh,
done.
I
You want to
remember what
finish?
my point was. Yeah,
Go for it.
before we did our first acquisition, or while we were in the middle of it, I went and talked to a lot of people in our industry that had done multiple acquisitions before and said, hey, do you have like a playbook? Do you have a list, a way that you go in? Like, I do this first, this second, this third. And the shocking thing to me was nobody had a strategy. Everybody just winged it, right?
Didn't have a written strategy.
Didn't have a written strategy. They had
That I would agree with. Yeah.
it kind of we just figured out as we go. And so that was one thing we learned through the process once we did our first acquisition is we got somebody in there and documented everything that we needed to do. So we have a 6-page document now. When we go in for an acquisition, everything is assigned to the teams. We know every little thing that needs to happen. And then when we do another acquisition, we say, oh, well, here's the 10 things that we missed. So we add those in there. So it's a growing, living document. But it makes after we did the first one, that was a bit of a challenge. We learned from it. The second one and the third one were significantly easier because everybody had their marching orders. They knew what their elements were that they needed to work on, and it was significantly less stressful through the process.
So at what point is it in part of your 6-page document or something you just know? At what point do you start blending that culture of existing versus? It sounds like your dogs have something to add, Tone, as well.
Yeah, that's bad.
Yeah, that's Winston. He's gotten
dog.
excited because somebody hit the doorbell.
Yeah, my dog does not bark that loud or that deep. Mine's more of a
Yeah,
actually more of a howl.
we're working on him. So at what point do we want to organize them or put them together?
Let me start that again, and then maybe we'll have Winston as a special guest later.
That'd be fun.
At what point in your acquisition playbook, I'll just say it, do you start adding your culture intentionally in with theirs? Is it a week, a month, a year? Does it depend? I hate that answer already. So give me something tangible here.
So that is one thing in our playbook. I don't have a specific timeline on. So there's the structural things like making sure people have logins to your systems, making sure that the signage is changed, business cards, all of those types of things, pricing and all that. The kind of way that we went about it in Anderson and what I think is good timeline in the future is 30 days, 60 days, having just timeline. So when I went in there first, I said, we're not touching anything right now, but in 30 days, we're going to start impacting pricing. So that was a window of opportunity that we could just see what was going on. The major changes that we made was at the year mark. So we watched everything. Wow. We implemented new systems and measurables, within the first 30 days. And then we were able to watch that because I don't know about your guys' experience, but a lot of businesses that we have acquired do not have good systems in place where they really know, what their customers are buying, how much the customers are paying for what they're buying and all that. And so we had to really watch that. So let's get the systems in place. Let's get that change in. And the major adjustments are going to be within a year after we have some measurables and some data that we can make decisions off of.
Yeah. And I mean, the cultural stuff, it takes time anyway. I mean, when we did the acquisition in Edmonton, I think day one we went in there and just literally introduced ourselves, showed up at 8:00, had some coffee and donuts and said, I'm Lars. I'm part of the new ownership group. First thing I want to talk about is what everyone is thinking. Your jobs are safe. We don't buy a company to then go in there and get rid of the people that make the company as successful as it is. And it is successful or we wouldn't be here acquiring it, right? And that usually kind of lets the air out of the room. It's like, or puts the air back into the room. I don't know, whatever one works there. We then just went into it. Okay, so this is our philosophy. We believe in working hard. We believe in fairness. We believe that fair and equal aren't the same thing. We believe that morality, there's a right and a wrong. And we're We're just here to learn how you guys run business. At some point, we're probably going to introduce some of our technologies because we want to have everything on the same platform. What you're going to see is a lot of the frustrations that you've probably had in your business. We're going to ask you about them, and we're going to work on improving them. And we're going to make a list of things with you that we want to improve for your company. And what I found was the reaction to that, because I didn't take that approach the previous one. The reaction to that was, more of a, oh, okay. And actually surprising to me was there's a lot of people saying, hey, man, like I'm really looking forward to bringing in some new ideas and, some fresh air.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure that lasted too long, but it was that method as opposed to kind of walking in and say, okay, as of today, the sign's changed on the door, and it was less of a shock to the system. It was just more of a, what's the analogy? You put the frog in the water and turn up the heat versus throwing them in at the end, right? So.
Well, I think that there's a lot of tactical type of stuff too, and we could go on for this forever. But just realizing again, putting yourself in the other person's shoes. What's getting ready to happen? Am I going to lose my job? Is everything changing? Who's my new manager going to be? Blah blah blah. Thinking in those terms, and then also structuring. Here's the message that we need to communicate to our customers when customers come in. What are we telling them that's happening? How do we introduce them to this new team that they're being involved with? And so you can really, and again, those are the types of things that I guess you learn over time through experience. From us, it was, let's make sure we document it, because we're not quite to the point yet, but I eventually would love to have an acquisition team that goes in and alongside of myself or whoever goes in and says, "Hey, welcome to the team. This is what's getting ready to happen. We have an orientation. Bring them on board with our core values, all those types of things, and then here's the acquisition team that's going to help transfer all of this over, and here's their role, and just get everybody as comfortable as possible with it." But it's kind of a learning experience, I think, through the process. But my big advice on that would just be document it so that you can repeat it a lot easier.
Yeah,
team.
I might add, I'm referring to a company in, this successful acquisition was more of the same. We weren't going into a new new marketplace. We weren't selling cars instead of locks, right? Like it was more of the same. So it was a lot easier just to now, if that was an electronics company that did accessing cameras, it would be a different strategy. But because we were so tightly aligned in the services provided, we were able to focus more on, the operational efficiency and merging of the operations of the two companies. So I thought I'd clarify that because it would have a different impact for sure.
So which one is the winner? Organic
Tony.
Or acquisition?
The winner's generally me, but Tony, do you want to touch on this first?
I'm going to give Lars his favorite answer, in that it really depends on what you're looking for. Sorry.
He pitched that up
think
earlier
that
too.
if you're looking to expand, I think in general they both can have benefits and be valuable. I think if you're looking to expand geographically, I can see acquisition helping there because you get an established customer base. That is something we have not done yet. And I remember actually talking to you guys in Denver a couple of years ago about, Chad, you mentioned employees that wanted to move, and we'd never thought about expanding geographically because I was like, well, I don't want to just own a business in South Dakota and have to find an employee to run it. How am I going to, do that? And I remember you guys saying, well, you should ask your employees. You'd be surprised. And I went home and asked our leadership team and people, hey, who would be interested in moving? I got like a whole bunch of hands. And I was like, wow. All right. So that's, I think, a tip that I would give people is to, if you are interested, or at least don't exclude expanding geographically, because
Tone,
you might never know.
That's pretty good advice in your dating life too. When you're, you're wondering what your wife's thinking, you just ask her. And then when she responds, it's a lot easier than guessing.
I think you might need more dating advice than me.
Lars is giving a marriage advice. This is incredible.
I hope people have their pens out right now.
The 50-year-old that isn't married giving dating advice.
50 that isn't married.
Wow.
I'm rounding up.
Tony.
And you're the oldest one
Really?
on here.
We've already talked about the math in Minnesota this episode. Let's move on, for God's sakes. So, did you
Anyways,
say organic
That
or
that
acquisition?
I
hold on a
think
second. That was a pretty heavy dig from Tone. Now let's just kind of document this.
This is a dig-free zone, Tone.
I'm
Yeah.
just
What
trying to
have
keep
I
up,
ever done to you to
Just
deserve that
attacking
kind
a
of?
man's age and just calling
Wow.
him 50.
You're Mr. Nice there.
Wow.
I think if you want to expand geographically, organic is a little bit trickier. So geographically, I would for sure go acquisition. I think, like you guys said, you have to have the right person, identify those people ahead of time, have a strategy for it. I think if it's locally, I would say that to me, it's 50-50 if it's our local. It just depends on making sure that it fits into your
Which ones
strategy.
work better for you? Which one worked better?
As far as growth, acquisition.
Acquisition.
I mean, it was more immediate growth. Hold on and figure out how to get there afterwards. But
Which one's more work?
It's a really good question.
This is the
I-
content we're here for.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't know.
Th-
I think
they're-
like
They're
organic
both
growth.
hard.
They're both hard.
They're both
that's
hard. I don't think it's a matter of your time of return. It's not really about which is easier or harder. They're both equally difficult. It's whatever your appetite is for your return on a time investment.
I think that acquisition is easier to do because you have to do it, right? Like you've just bought a $1 million business and you have to figure out how to integrate it. So it forces you to basically grow. I think organically is easier to do efficiently. So you can kind of plot along and scale your team accordingly.
Less
So it's
risk.
easier to probably be more profitable if you're growing organically,
Mhm.
but it's far easier to scale your revenue through acquisition. I mean, you can go double tomorrow if you want to go buy it. So,
Yeah,
and then you just got to figure out how to integrate it, which is the
I would
non-easy part.
I would I don't know if I'm arguing with you or not or agreeing with you, but I would say that it's the acquisition is for my personality is a intentional investment in growth.
Mm-hmm.
Organic is too soft, and
Yes.
if it doesn't work, then nobody knows it, and so
Correct.
you're less
Yes.
forced to actually make it happen. Acquisition is putting a stake in the ground and saying, "We're doing this thing, and we got to put all the effort behind it to make it
Right.
happen." So
I'm
that would just
investing in this. We have to go figure it out.
Yeah.
we tried organic growth in a separate market, and it was too soft. It did not stick, and there was not enough effort behind it to make it grow, especially
Does
in
that
a
mean you
timetable that you were wanting.
organic in a separate market, meaning you started a company?
We relocated 2 people in a separate market to try to grow the business, and it
Rented a
did
building,
not.
put them in a truck, and did your thing there rather than acquire existing.
Correct. So
Gotcha.
it was starting with a new customer base,
That's by far the hardest. By far.
Mhm.
Yeah. The well, first, I've never heard anyone add the letter L into the word soft, but the soft stuff that you were doing, Chad, I do agree. I'm I mentioned it earlier. I'm gonna plug it again and say
Oh boy.
that it is going to be dependent on your personality. If you
Hmm.
like that risk reward challenge driver kind of personality, acquisition is a natural fit for you. I love acquisitions. I would way rather acquire than the methodical method of organic growth. Now, that is what makes me almost impossible to work with. I'll be the first to admit that. But the intentionality and the challenge of organic growth for me is it's a more of a systematic day over day approach, whereas acquisition, it's figure out the number, bring it together, and now we just have to make it work, and there's no going back on it. So yeah, I would prefer acquisition over a methodical organic growth, but I also fully acknowledge that my personality is a little different. My patience is not very high.
Very low. Tony's typing away. Okay, so there
Yeah,
isn't a clear
good
there
notes
is,
here. Good notes.
there isn't a clear winner between the two. It's really how you approach it, and then ultimately at the end of the day, what are you trying to achieve?
Yeah.
And if you're trying to achieve a certain revenue portfolio size or whatever, then you may have to go through acquisition to get to that point faster. But if you're just trying to have year over year growth in a certain way, then organic is probably going to be a good taste for you.
So, as usual, you two fools are going to say it depends. There is a clear winner, and it's acquisition.
Okay.
Well, it all
Yes.
depends.
Tony, if you are typing, hopefully you're on Amazon buying a picture or something to put behind you.
Some type of
I have them. I got 2 of them over there in the corner. I'm just
It's a
waiting
good spot for them. Yep.
he's still waiting to he's indecisive on where he wants to hang them behind.
Wrap us up, Tone.
Okay.
Give us some
Final
knowledge, some
insights and
insights.
advice. So I
Let's
got
go.
3 things I thought of here. I really like Chad's idea of the acquisition team. That's when I started. As we are going to grow, I do want to try to identify at least a person that could spearhead acquisitions. I think having a plan around that and having a person that, especially something we want to look into doing is expanding geographically, having somebody that can go in and help get that off the ground. Another piece of advice that we learned is every acquisition we've had the owner write letters to the customer explaining the acquisition. Customers have responded well to that, seeing the owner kind of hand off the company to the new company, put in the good words of advice or, recommendation about us, and really make it clear, like, hey, I'm here to help with this transition. I identified this person to sell to because of X, Y, and Z. Really help to make sure that the customers stick around. Another thing I thought of, Lars, you mentioned you look for successful companies to buy and just kind of expand the portfolio. I wouldn't shy away from unsuccessful companies. I think Warren Buffett has the analogy of cigar butts. You can go in and maybe buy a company that is got a good customer base, but doesn't have a good management structure, doesn't have a good, systems and processes, and really turn it around. So I would look at, again, just be intentional around why you want to grow, and find the right company accordingly. If there's an opportunity to find somebody that's kind of floundering, you can turn them around. Don't shy away from it.
You lost me on the cigar butts.
Well, and Tony Buffett over there, I think, made a pretty good point there. But, I'm going through the acquisitions that we've done, just for those of us that are in that position, considering how do we want to do it. If we're doing same for same, so you're a locksmith company and you're buying another locksmith company, that's the easiest. Different geography, that's still not a big difference. You do have to have someone in a new geography that is in charge of bringing it home. I think that's what Chad mentioned. That was a strike. Same as us, we've done an acquisition that didn't anoint anyone a specific, to oversee that operation. Didn't work as well. Organic growth is something that I think, if you're intentional about it, it is certainly the least risky of the group. It's just slower. And depending on what you're trying to get to, that enterprise value that you're envisioning, that's going to take the time. The hardest one for sure, and I haven't even talked about this one, but I should mention it. It was an ancillary business, is what I'd call it, a startup. Okay, we started a door company. But again, the model was the same. I mentioned it earlier. To tell the whole story here, the biggest wholesaler we have, I always say, if there's anyone you think I should meet, let me know. And one day he sent me a text and was like, hey, there's someone here you should meet. I was like, all right. I literally got in the car, drove over there to meet her. We hit it off. She was charismatic. She was technically very good at what she did. We started a door company, an automatic company based on her. Same thing. I said, hey, we'll take care of all the crap you don't want to do. You just be you, and we'll build a business around it. That was an organic, started from scratch, new company, new incorporation, new everything. A couple of years, started doing a couple million revenue. That has its downsides as well. And that company ultimately doesn't exist anymore. But that is one, aspect we didn't talk about here today. It is possible, but it is definitely the most challenging of the 3 scenarios that we've talked about. So acquisition, same for same, absolutely the easiest. Same for different new services, probably going to be a challenge. Organic growth is always going to be there, but doubling down on what you have might be the easiest, but is the slowest. And then starting from scratch is very challenging.
Yeah, starting from scratch is a big challenge whenever you are either trying to expand your existing market or into a new area as well. But on the final advice, I think that I would go through we've talked about it already. Structure a plan, document a plan,
Mhm.
share the vision what you're trying to accomplish with as many people as you can, because the more if you're trying to expand, the more people that are aware that you're trying to expand, a lot of people are going to assume that you're okay with the status quo. More people that you're communicating that to, the more people, those more opportunities are going to come open. And realize that it's not an immediate change. I think everything we talked about here was time. It's either time for the acquisition to come to life, time for once the acquisition is done for it to actually take hold and you see the actual return. And it may just take a lot of time to start the conversation and the relationship around acquisition. Going back to the advice that somebody gave me around acquisitions, some of these start years in advance with a introductory phone call or a conversation at a conference or
Mhm.
wherever they come from, and it may turn into something in 12 months, it may turn into
Mhm.
something in 5 years. But as long as you have those conversations open and you're keeping that relationship alive, then something may come of it down the line, and maybe it won't, but at least you're in that
Mhm.
conversation. And the way that I like to leave it with a lot of people is, at least give me the first opportunity. Like,
Mhm.
at least
Mhm.
give me the first opportunity at the conversation. It may not end, it may not go well, it may not go the way that we all want it to go, but at least if you'll give me the first opportunity, and then we can kind of go from there.
Mhm.
Guys, this has been a really, I think, an eye-opening conversation for me. I appreciate the dialogue that we've had here, and it was really good to break that down into a two-part episode. So if you're just picking up this episode and you're like, I feel like I left off the first half of this conversation, well, go back and check out the episode before this one, and you'll get the first half of the conversation. So this was one that just really, we got into it a little deeper than what we could combine into one episode. So thank you very much for checking this out. Again, everything is available. All the information on this episode, all the information about the three voices that you just heard talking for the past 30 or 45 minutes or so, are available on our website as well. It's unlockedpodcast.com. And we really appreciate you joining us. We've got lots of great conversations and topics coming down the pipeline. Tony is responsible for all of our upcoming episodes
Oh
and the
boy.
topics that we're going to be
Ooh,
discussing. So he's getting
fun.
ready to drop a lot of information here for you on what we're going to be
Can we
talking
talk
about next
about
time.
can we talk about ice cream in the next episode?
Ice cream. That's
Mhm.
and then we also have to figure out a giveaway for our coffee cups, because
Oh,
and springs.
and
So
springs. My God.
from all of us here at the Unlocked Podcast, thank you for listening and watching today, and we will hope to see you next time on this same channel or radio station. What is this thing called anyway? Does it-
Oh man.
Yeah.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing this is free, right?
yes, because if somebody
'Cause
was paying for it,
if somebody is paying for it and they said, the same channel radio,
thank you for
yeah,
joining us. We'll join you next time on the Unlocked Podcast.
yeah. See, that was better.
There we go.
Yeah.